The chamber was tense. Jasmine Crockett spoke for struggling families and exhausted workers. Then Barron cut her off. "Not Americans are not allowed here to talk." Silence fell until Jasmine asked one question that turned the hearing upside down, leaving him shuffling papers and walking away. The United States Congress chamber is not just a room. It's a stage where history has been written and rewritten countless times. The tall ceilings echo with the voices of leaders past, the polished wooden desks, the long rows of seats, the weight of the flag at the front. Every corner whispers stories of battles fought with words instead of weapons. On this particular day, the chamber felt different. The air was heavy. There was a hush, the kind of silence that makes people lean forward in their chairs, sensing that something big is about to happen. Staff members carried folders and whispered hurriedly, but even their footsteps seemed to tread more softly than usual. Everyone knew this hearing was not going to be ordinary. At the center of attention was Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, known for her sharp mind and fearless way of speaking. She walked into the chamber with steady steps. She wasn't there to play games. She was there to talk about the problems weighing on everyday Americans. Soaring grocery prices, families living paycheck to paycheck, parents juggling 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet. She came prepared not only with papers in her hands but with fire in her voice. To her, this wasn't just another political performance. It was her chance to carry the voices of people outside the marble walls of Washington. Voices that often get ignored. Jasmine took her seat, adjusted her microphone, and waited. Around her, lacquers settled in, some leaning back with arms crossed, others already scribbling notes, curious about what was about to unfold. But she wasn't the only figure drawing attention that day. Across the chamber, another name had everyone whispering: Barron Trump. The youngest Trump, tall, composed, carrying the famous last name that had been at the heart of American politics for years. For the first time, he was stepping out of the shadow of being the son of. This was his debut, his chance to show he had a voice of his own. People watched him carefully. Every move, every glance. He wasn't just another face in the crowd. He represented something large: legacy, power, and expectation. His presence in Congress wasn't just about politics. It was about whether he could carry the weight of his family name into the toughest arena of all. The atmosphere tightened. The contrast between the two couldn't have been sharper. On one side, Jasmine Crockett, fiery, grounded, determined to spotlight America's real struggles. On the other, Barron Trump, new to the stage but already carrying the aura of someone who believed the chamber belonged to him. As the hearing prepared to start, there was a subtle electricity in the air. It was the same kind of feeling you get before a storm breaks. The quiet that tells you thunder isn't far away. Lawmakers shifted in their seats. Staffers glanced back and forth. Cameras adjusted their focus. Every single person in that room understood this wasn't just another discussion. This was going to be a showdown. And if you looked closely, you could see it written in the body language. Jasmine sitting upright, steady, her eyes scanning her notes, but her posture saying she was ready for anything. Barron leaning back slightly, composed, his jaw tight as if rehearsing his moment of entry into this world of high stakes and sharp tongues. For Jasmine Crockett, this was about representing the people. The single mother struggling to pay rent, the factory worker worried about layoffs, the student buried under loans. For Barron Trump, this was about something different, proving he could step into his father's arena, stand in the chamber of power and command attention in his own right. It was more than just politics. It was legacy versus grit, fame versus fire. The gavel struck, echoing like a drum beat across the chamber. The hearing was officially in session. Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, adjusted her microphone, and prepared to speak. She didn't know it yet, but her words would set off a chain of events that would shift the spotlight away from Barron Trump's much-anticipated debut and place it squarely on her. And Barron, he didn't know it either. But before the day was done, his first step into Congress would end. Not with applause, but with retreat. The stage was set, the players were ready, and the silence in the chamber was about to be shattered. The sound of the gavel still echoed when Jasmine Crockett began to speak. Her tone was steady but urgent, the kind of voice that pulled every ear toward her. She wasn't reading off a cold list of numbers. She was painting pictures, vivid and raw. She spoke of families standing in grocery store aisles, calculators in hand, trying to figure out what to put back because the cart was already too expensive. She spoke of parents kissing their children goodnight before heading out to work the night shift because one job wasn't enough anymore. She spoke of the quiet fear hanging over towns where factories had shut down, leaving hardworking people without security, without answers. Her words weren't polished to perfection like a campaign speech. They were alive, heavy with the weight of reality. And as she spoke, you could almost feel the walls of the chamber listening. Some lawmakers leaned forward, nodding slowly. Others kept their expressions flat, unwilling to show agreement, but unable to hide that her words were cutting through the noise. Even staffers paused in their note-taking, stealing glances at her. Jasmine Crockett had the floor, and she was making every second count. But then it happened. From across the chamber, Barron Trump shifted, his tall frame straightened, and with a sharp movement, he leaned toward his microphone. His voice came out firm, almost clipped. "Non-Americans are not allowed here to talk." The words sliced through the room like a blade. For a moment, time itself seemed to stop. You could hear papers stilling in mid-turn. Pens froze over notepad. Lawmakers turned their heads in unison, eyes widening, some in shock, some in disbelief. It wasn't just a challenge. It was a dismissal, an attempt to strip away her very right to speak. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was loaded, heavy, like the breath everyone holds just before lightning cracks the sky. Jasmine Crockett didn't move at first. She sat there, hands resting on the table, her eyes locked forward. She didn't flinch, but inside that silence, you could feel the weight of the attack. Barron's words weren't subtle. They weren't careful. They were designed to wound, to take all the fire she had brought into that chamber and smother it with one sweeping statement. In that moment, you could almost see two realities at play. On one hand, Barron Trump, new to this stage, but carrying the boldness of someone used to the power of his family name. He looked confident, certain that he had just seized control of the room with a single sentence. On the other hand, Jasmine Crockett, seasoned, sharp, tested by battles far tougher than. She didn't raise her eyebrows. She didn't shoot back right away. Instead, she let the silence stretch, letting the weight of his words hang in the air like smoke after an explosion. In that silence, it was more powerful than any instant reaction, because it made everyone lean closer. It made everyone wait. You could see staffers glance nervously at each other, whispering under their breath. Some lawmakers smirked, thinking Barron had just landed his first strike. Others frowned, knowing full well that Crockett was not someone who stayed down for long. Even the cameras, those quiet, unblinking eyes in the corners, seemed to zoom in tighter, capturing every flicker of expression. Barron sat there, leaning back slightly now, his lips pressed into a thin line, almost like he was satisfied with himself. It was written in his posture. This was his move, his opening punch. But here's the thing about punches. They're only powerful if the other person doesn't know how to take a hit. And Jasmine Crockett, she had built her career on standing back up. The silence was about to break. She adjusted her microphone slowly, deliberately, as if to say, "I heard you and I am about to answer." The chamber seemed to hold its breath. What would she say? Would she defend herself, argue her right to speak, or lash out in anger? What came next would be none of those things. It would be sharper, smarter, and it would flip the entire moment on its head. Because while Barron thought he had set a trap, Jasmine was about to spring one of her own. And when she finally spoke, it wouldn't just be a response. It would be a question so unexpected, so cutting that Barron Trump's debut moment in the chamber would begin to unravel before his very eyes. The air was tight, the tension unbearable. Everyone leaned in, and Jasmine Crockett finally leaned forward, ready to speak. The chamber was locked in silence. Barron Trump's words still lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. "Non-Americans are not allowed here to talk." It was bold, it was brash, and it was meant to cut Jasmine Crockett down. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She sat still, her hands folded calmly on the desk in front of her, her eyes locked on Barron like a hawk watching its prey. For a long moment, she said nothing, and that silence was deafening. You could feel the tension crawling across the room. Every second she stayed quiet, the anticipation grew heavier. Lawmakers shifted in their seats. Staffers held their pens just above their notepads, but didn't dare write. Even the cameras seemed to zoom closer, waiting for the counterpunch. Barron leaned back slightly, his lips curving into the faintest hint of a smirk. In his mind, he had landed the first blow. He had stepped into this arena and shown he wasn't afraid to swing. The smirk said, "Your move," and Jasmine Crockett moved. She leaned forward slowly, deliberately, adjusting her microphone with a faint scrape that echoed across the chamber. The kind of movement that tells everyone in the room something is coming. Her voice was calm, almost too calm, but calm voices can cut sharper than the loudest shout. She looked directly at Barron, her eyes narrowing, and said, "Tell me, is Ivanka your sister or your mother?" The words dropped like a thunderclap. The chamber gasped, audible gasps. Lawmakers turned their heads so fast you could hear the shuffle of suits against leather chairs. Staffers froze mid-breath, mouths slightly open. For a moment, even the microphone seemed to hum louder, like they were straining to catch every ounce of reaction. The question was brutal, not because it was complicated, but because it was simple, direct, inescapable. It stripped away the polish, the posture, the smirk, and it forced Barron into a corner he had no plan to escape from. His face changed instantly. The smirk disappeared. His jaw tightened. His hands twitched against the stack of papers in front of him, fingers pressing the edges too hard, crinkling them. He tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Finally he muttered, "I'm not here to prove this." It was defensive. And it was not the answer anyone in that chamber expected from someone who had walked in with the aura of confidence. The silence that followed his words was even louder than before. Crockett didn't push further. She didn't need to. One question had flipped the room. She sat back in her chair, her eyes still locked on him, calm as ever. She had thrown her punch, and it had landed with precision. Barron, meanwhile, was unraveling. His composure slipped with every second that passed. He shuffled his notes, straightened them, then shuffled them again, his movements restless, betraying the unease he was desperate to hide. He glanced around the room, but no one met his eyes. Some lawmakers looked down at their desks. Others scribbled on papers they didn't need to write on, anything to avoid the sight of him in that moment. Finally, Barron broke the silence. His voice was lower now, rushed, almost panicked. "I have an important meeting to attend." It sounded rehearsed, like an escape line he had kept in his pocket just in case. But instead of saving him, it only made him look smaller. He pushed back his chair. The legs scraped across the chamber floor, a sound that rang louder than it should have. He gathered his papers clumsily, avoiding eye contact with Jasmine, with lawmakers, with the cameras, and then he stood up. Tall as he was, in that moment he looked less powerful and more exposed. He muttered something under his breath, but it was lost in the echo of his footsteps. As he turned and walked out of the chamber, the door closed behind him with a hollow thud, and just like that, Barron Trump was gone. The chamber buzzed, low murmurs rippling through the rows like waves. No one needed to declare a winner. The sight of him walking out, beaten not by a crowd, not by a chorus, but by a single question, that was the answer. Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her arms in victory. She didn't glow. She simply sat back, her face steady, her eyes calm, as if to say, "This is what it means to stand your ground." For Barron, this was supposed to be the beginning of his voice in Congress. Instead, it ended with a retreat that everyone in the room would remember. And for Jasmine Crockett, it was the moment she showed that in the world of politics, sometimes one well-placed question can be more powerful than 1,000 speeches. The battle was over, but the echoes of her question would linger. The heavy chamber doors closed behind Barron Trump. With a hollow thud, the sound echoed like the final note of a song cut short. His footsteps faded down the hallway, but the weight of his exit hung in the room long after he was gone. Inside, no one moved right away. The lawmakers sat frozen in their seats, some still staring at the door he had just walked through, others stealing glances at Jasmine Crockett, as if waiting for her next move. The silence was thick, charged with unspoken thoughts. And then the murmurs began, low at first,
A whisper between two staffers. A quiet shuffle of papers from one lawmaker, leaning toward another. But quickly the chamber filled with a soft rumble of voices, all carrying the same realization. What had just happened was not routine. It was not politics as usual. They had witnessed a rare moment, one that would be remembered. Jasmine Crockett didn't speak. She didn't need to. She sat back in her chair, calm, her face steady, her hands resting lightly on the table in front of her. Her composure was louder than any word she could have said. It told the room I didn't just win an argument. I held my ground against a name that usually makes people step back. Across the chamber, lawmakers reacted in different ways. Some leaned forward, whispering to each other with looks of disbelief. Their eyes widened as if saying, "Did that really just happen?" Others scribbled notes furiously, trying to capture the exact moment, the exact words before the memory blurred. A few sat in stiff silence, unwilling to show emotion. Their faces, masks, hiding what they truly thought. But the energy of the room was unmistakable. Jasmine had turned the tables. One senator, older and weathered by decades in politics, leaned back in his chair and let out a slow, quiet whistle. Another staffer, barely able to contain herself, pressed her hand to her mouth, as if to stop a laugh from slipping out. The tension had snapped, and in its place was a mix of shock, awe, and something else. Barron Trump's exit had been meant to look powerful, like he was walking away on his own terms. But the chamber didn't see it that way. They saw a retreat. They saw a young man who had come in swinging, only to be stopped cold by one sharp question he couldn't answer. And in politics, perception is everything. Jasmine Crockett, still seated, finally adjusted her microphone again. The faint sound pulled eyes back to her. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. Instead, she spoke with the same steady tone she had begun with. Clear, measured, serious. She reminded the chamber of what had been lost in the noise. The American people, the families struggling to pay rent, the workers without health care, the parents worried about their children's futures. Her words cut through the murmurs and brought the focus back to what truly mattered. It was a master stroke, because while Barron had tried to make the moment about her, Jasmine turned it back to the people watching, the people living through the struggles she described. As she spoke, the lawmakers couldn't look away. She had not only survived the confrontation, she had taken control of the entire narrative. And outside the chamber, you could almost imagine the ripple effect spreading like waves. Her words would travel beyond those walls, carried in retellings and whispers in conversations that began with, "Did you hear what happened when?" But back inside, the chamber was different now. The air felt lighter, though not less tense. It was the kind of tension that comes after a storm, the kind where people look around trying to process what they've just witnessed. The young staffer near the back leaned close to her colleague and whispered, "That's going to be remembered." The colleague nodded slowly, eyes still fixed on Jasmine Crockett. One thing was clear. Jasmine had done more than defend herself. She had shown strength, quick wit, and composure under fire. And she had done it in a way that made people sit up straighter, listen harder, and see her in a new light. Barron's retreat wasn't just his problem. It was her victory. The lawmakers who might have dismissed her earlier now had to reconsider. The ones who had underestimated her couldn't ignore her anymore. In the chamber itself, with its long history of heated debates and bitter clashes, had just added a new chapter to its story. Jasmine Crockett closed her statement with one final reminder, calm, steady, but heavy with meaning. She said that real leadership is not about silencing voices, but about hearing them, not about shutting people out, but about letting them in. The words hung in the air, undeniable, and as she leaned back again, letting the gavel bring the session to a close, the thoughts settled into the minds of everyone in that room. Jasmine Crockett had not only held her ground, she had turned what should have been her downfall into her defining moment. The fallout wasn't just Barron's walkout. The fallout was the shift in respect, the change in perception, and the undeniable truth.
That one question, one moment, had redrawn the lines of power in that chamber. The chamber was quiet again. The gavel had come down. The session had ended, and the lawmakers began filing out in small groups. But the energy of what had just taken place refused to fade. It lingered in the air, like a storm cloud after thunder. Heavy, unforgettable Jasmine Crockett remained seated for a moment longer, her papers neatly stacked before her. She didn't rush. She didn't gather her things in a scramble like Barron had. Instead, she moved with calm precision, the kind that says, "I came here prepared. I leave here unshaken." Her composure alone told a story. She hadn't just stood her ground. She had shifted the entire balance of that confrontation. And even though Barron Trump had left the room, his shadow still hung there, not as a mark of dominance, but as proof of retreat. Outside, the hallways buzzed. Staffers whispered, reporters hovered, and aides clutched their clipboards as they hurried to brief their bosses. Everyone wanted to know what had just happened inside those walls. The question echoed, spreading further and further. But for Jasmine, the meaning was clear. This wasn't just about one question, one exchange. This was about something bigger, something every American watching from afar could understand. Because what she had done in that chamber wasn't only for her, it was for the family. She spoke about the ones struggling to keep food on the table, the workers trying to survive paycheck to paycheck, the communities left behind, waiting for leaders to remember them. Her words earlier about rent, jobs, and healthcare weren't just political talking points. They were the real battles millions of people face daily. And in that moment, when Barron Trump tried to silence her with a swipe about who belonged in that chamber, Jasmine Crockett stood tall, not just for herself, but for everyone who has ever been told they don't belong. That is why her response cut so deep. It wasn't only clever, it was symbolic. She didn't just defend her right to speak. She defended the right of every unheard voice to demand attention. And this is where the story connects to you, the viewer. Think about it. How many times in your own life have you seen people with power try to dismiss others simply because they could? Maybe it was at work. Maybe it was in school. Maybe it was right in your own community. That moment in Congress wasn't just about Jasmine and Barron. It was about the larger fight between those who silence and those who refuse to stay silent. Jasmine's strength in that chamber becomes a reflection of the strength ordinary people can carry. It's a reminder that when someone tries to push you out, sometimes the most powerful response isn't anger, but a question so sharp it leaves no room for escape. Her calmness was her weapon. Her words were her armor. And in the end, she left standing, not because she shouted the loudest, but because she spoke with purpose. Now imagine the impact of that moment. Imagine millions watching, listening, replaying those words in their minds. Tell me, is Ivanka your sister, your mother? It was a question that stripped away the facade, forced Barron Trump to stumble, and revealed something larger, the danger of arrogance, without substance. But beyond the drama, beyond the clash of personalities, Jasmine's victory carried a message for all of us. Leadership is not about bloodlines. It is not about names passed down or the power inherited from family. Leadership is about listening, speaking truth, and standing firm, even when the ground beneath you shakes. And here's where you watching this come in. Jasmine Crockett's stand only matters if people see themselves in it. If they recognize that what unfolded in that chamber mirrors the struggles happening outside it, in homes, in workplaces, in schools, and in neighborhoods across America. Her win wasn't just personal, it was collective. Because every time someone pushes back against being silenced, it creates space for others to be heard too. So the question is, what do you think? Was this more than a debate? Was this a glimpse into what happens when power collides with truth? Think about Barron's the rushed excuse of an important meeting, the way his footsteps echoed as he left, the silence he left behind. That wasn't strength. That was retreat. And retreat reveals something powerful.
that even the mightiest name can falter when faced with the right question.
Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett didn't just stay.
She finished strong. She reminded everyone listening that the real issues, the struggles of ordinary people, matter more than power games or political theater. And that's where her true victory lies. Not in humiliating an opponent, but in redirecting the spotlight back to where it belonged, the people. So now it's your turn to weigh in. Do you see Jasmine Crockett stand as a turning point? Do you see her as someone who carried your struggles into that chamber and refused to let them be silenced? Or do you see it as just another clash in a room built on clashes? Her question ended Barron's moment, but her message that's still alive and it's waiting for you to respond. So, let's hear it. What do you think?